Tewkesbury. The town of Tewkesbury developed into its current layout as a consequence of the abbey, which was founded during the Anglo-Saxon period. Later, during the medieval period, this became a significant institution funded by the lands it owned and the patronage of the local barons. On the north side of the abbey, along Church Street, the first town buildings were built. These early buildings include a marketplace at the Crescent, which was formerly the Bull Ring, a mill on the Avon cutting to the Severn, and along Barton Street lay the Tithe Barn and other outbuildings. Sometime during the 14th century, a planned expansion of the settlement was created, as the High Street was laid out using formal burgage plots. A burgage consisted of a house with a narrow strip of land behind it allocated to the tenant. Most of the oldest buildings date from the 15th and 16th centuries, even if their timber frames are now hidden by Queen Anne brick facades. The Victorian builder Thomas Collins saved many of the survivors when heritage was first recognised as an end of itself. The surrounding rivers and floodplains prevented the town expanding beyond these natural boundaries, and so its extent has altered little since the medieval period. Tewkesbury presents one of the best preserved medieval townscapes in England. Much of the prosperity of Tewkesbury came from coaching traffic, but when the railways bypassed the town, this caused time to stand still, preserving much of the medieval character and layout.
Tewkesbury is really the jewel in the crown of survival. It's not particularly well known outside of Gloucester, I think, as a survival of timber framing, but it has a huge amount. You can walk down the High Street and you can literally see. Some of the fronts have changed admittedly, but it's a medieval high street, a huge amount of timber framing survival, so intact you are literally walking up and down a medieval high street when you walk to the Tewkesbury Festival. So it's the sheer number of buildings surviving, which survives due to not having enough money to develop. So when Tewkesbury lost its coaching industry and rail came along, there was not the money to develop buildings and knock them down and put new ones up, so they just made do with what they got. It's absolutely stunning to walk down that high street and see everything surviving.
Tewkesbury has a spectacular collection of timber-framed buildings, with overhanging jetties and ornate carved doorways. Due to the lack of space, the buildings were built particularly close to each other, and additional stories and jettying were employed. Fine examples of very narrow, high and jettied buildings are evident in the High Street at No. 9, Golden Key House, and No. 132, Cornell Books, now dated between 1471 and 1491. The old houses of the town, occupying a large proportion of the frontage of the three main streets, have many examples of timber framing. An intermingling of Georgian brick fronts among the older timber-framed houses is characteristic of the main streets. The earliest building tree-ring dated in Tewkesbury is No. 9 Church Street, which is dated to 1332 and has a crown strut roof.
So in 9 Church Street, the earliest building we've dated in Tewkesbury, which is 1332, incredibly early. You don't get many surviving buildings before 1400. To find this is incredibly exciting. Precision dating with the tree ring analysis, so we know exactly 1332, and we find this unique for Tewkesbury structure type of roof that we haven't found anywhere else in Gloucester. We have found examples now, having researched it up in York, a long way away. We've got the principal rafters coming up, and these are your purlins which run along the roof to stop it raking, collapsing down. Your common rafters of your roof would extend that way and that way. But what we have here are truncated principal rafters. There's this second timber here, which you can see is literally supporting the purlin. But to have found it's very exciting, and now that we've found one, perhaps there's more.
No. 34 to 50 Church Street also known as the Abbey cottages, represent a continuous terrace of at least 23 timber-framed dwellings. This terrace is dated to 1408, and survival of a medieval terrace of such length is very unusual. 3 fine examples of exposed timber frame are the Black Bear Inn, dated to 1439, and the Baptist Chapel, dated to 1458, both with queen strut roofs, and the Berkeley Arms, dated to 1495, which has a raking queen strut roof.
Black Bear is lovely. It's got multi-phase structure. It's like a whole group of houses. There were originally 2 very handsome houses on facing the street. One unfortunately was destroyed by fire. And then all these ranges behind. I can't remember the precise sequence, but you can demonstrate how they butt against each other. And they're all very close in date. So there's a kind of sense of a big flowering of building at that time in Tewkesbury.
Associated with Tewkesbury Abbey, Abbey House is dated to 1438.
Abbey House is this enormous building that stands just the west front of the Abbey, and it's clearly one of the original Abbey buildings. It has been assumed to have been either a guest hall or part of the Abbot's lodgings for Tewkesbury Abbey. Now, this building is a magnificent structure, and it's full of medieval woodwork. And the back wall is now a stone wall, and the interior is divided into several separate stories. But what was exciting for me was to discover that, in fact, none of this was originally true, that it was originally built as a timber hall, at least above what we now think of as first floor level, and that it originally had no internal floors at all. And it was pretty much exactly like a peasant house of the period, but on a massively grand scale. So it had a central hall and had 2 separate end bays, and none of these were floored. And the number of medieval alterations that happened, initially the first floor went in, and then the second floor went in. And the fact that this building, even though it sort of looks homogeneously magnificent as a big medieval residential block, actually has had all these different phases of alteration internally, is quite remarkable.
The abbey roofs in the north transept and nave roofs have been dated to 1521 and 1723 respectively.